Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mike Norvell, the Florida State Seminoles, dipping their toes in the transfer portal, once again going out and landing former Harvard offensive lineman Jacob Rizzy. And this is a really exciting get. Now, I had to go back last night and this morning, watch a little Jacob Rizzy's hand up. I haven't watched a ton of Harvard football the last couple of years, but found some Harvard games. Watch a little Jacob Rizzy. Have some notes I want to talk to you guys about and talk about what he brings to the table for this Florida State offensive line. At the end of the day, you're seeing Mike Norvell just kind of play the numbers game and look at getting veteran guys in depth on this offensive line, kind of stimulating a lot of healthy competition heading into spring practice and fall camp. Want to talk Jacob Rizzy, talk a little bit about how this Florida State offensive line is shaking out. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys and a special shout out to the Florida State fans. This has been a program that we've had a blast talking about the last couple of weeks. Transfer portal, high school recruiting trail. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And my apologies on being late on this one. I try to get these ones out as quickly as I can. But in Jacob Rizzy's case, I had to do a little extra prep work because I was not very familiar with Jacob Rizzy coming out of the transfer portal, but was able to go in and get some games in from Jacob Rizzy in that 2023 year. I guess we'll start with kind of the career trajectory of Jacob Rizzy. In 2022, played right tackle for Harvard, faced over 366 pass pro opportunities, only gave up 7 pressures. And then in 2023, he goes over to the left tackle spot, has 304 pass pro opportunities, only gives up 6 pressures. So he has a lot of versatility in terms of what he can do at both tackle spots and is phenomenal in pass protection. And that's what you see on the film. Jacob Rizzy, although not necessarily the most imposing offensive lineman, he's a guy that is a phenomenal athlete, can work up to the second level very well. And in space, working with speedier edge rushers, Jacob Rizzy has the feet to be very fluid in pass protection. Now, doing a little reading on Jacob Rizzy and kind of talking about where Florida State views Jacob Rizzy as a guy fitting into their roster, sounds like they want him to play on that interior offensive line spot. And I think what's most exciting about Jacob Rizzy is I think he can play most positions on the offensive line. I mean, 6'5", has good length, has really good athleticism. He's a guy that I certainly could see slotting in at tackle, but it sounds like Florida State sees him more as an interior guy. So I think Florida State has a lot of confidence that he can play on the inside as well. And I think what you're getting with Jacob Rizzy is a guy that has a really high floor. Like, you bring in Jacob Rizzy, you know he's going to be a fluid athlete. He's going to be good in pass pro. I'm interested to see if he can get that imposing his will in the run game, dominating the line of scrimmage. We did our Florida State offensive line conversation last week, and I think the one thing that we're looking for from Florida State is taking that step on the offensive line, a unit that has gotten progressively better over the last couple of years. You're still looking for this Florida State offensive line to get kind of more to that elite threshold, right? We talked about Florida State last year. I mean, there were a lot of boxes that were getting checked as national championship caliber. That one box that might not have been checked last year was on that offensive line. Was it a group that was national championship caliber? I think it was damn close. I think there's still some meat left on the bone in terms of what that Florida State offensive line can be. And I think it largely comes on dominating the line of scrimmage. When you want to run some of those counter and power concepts, can you impose your will? Can you reestablish the line of scrimmage? And that's probably what I'm looking for Jacob Rizzy to add to his game. This is a guy that when you ask him to go pull around, work up to the second level, be an athlete, Jacob Rizzy has athleticism in full. I think he's a phenomenal athlete, moves his feet extremely well. Can he be a guy that is moving big bodies off the line of scrimmage? That's probably the question that I have. And I think it comes with one at 6'5". You got to make sure you're playing with low pad levels. Probably want to maybe get a little bit more weight on if you have that 6'5" frame. But he's a guy that has a lot of high upside in terms of the floor that he brings. And I think more importantly, the conversation of continuing to add quality depth to this Florida State offensive line. I mean, this was a unit that, as much as I want to be critical of it in 2023, it was a unit that was really banged up and kind of hard to get a true evaluation on how good that unit was because they were cycling in so many bodies and their depth was kind of getting depleted a little bit. And so I think what Mike Norvell is doing in this transfer portal is bringing in a lot of guys to add to that depth of this Florida State offensive line. You bring in a guy like Richie Leonard, you bring in a guy like Terrence Ferguson, you're suddenly kind of feeling pretty good about where this Florida State offensive line stands. So you pull up what they've done in the portal. I mean, they've added Richie Leonard, Jacob Rizzy, and Terrence Ferguson on that offensive line. Jacob Rizzy, a guy that, although it's at the FCS level in the Ivy League, has started 2 straight years at the tackle position. Richie Leonard, the fourth, he's a guy that played all 12 games for the Florida Gators in 2023. He's kind of a blue chip starter as well. And then you have a guy in Terrence Ferguson that has a ton of high upside, can be that road grader, that very powerful kind of force on the offensive line. Combined with returning a lot of veteran talent, you take a look at this Florida State 2-deep on the offensive line. One, they have guys that can play all over the line of scrimmage. I think that is probably the best asset that Jacob Rizzy brings to the table. A guy that's played left tackle, a guy that's played right tackle, a guy that the staff is confident can play on the inside. And then you add a guy like Richie Leonard and Terrence Ferguson, who are going to be very high floor guards on the inside. You suddenly look at this Florida State offensive line and you say, I feel good about not only the depth, but the competition. And I think that is a kind of a massive talking point that doesn't get talked about enough. You take a look at Georgia or Michigan and why those offensive lines have been so good for so many years. I think largely they got like 7, 8, 9, 10 guys that they feel comfortable with trotting out. And so that competition in practice, if you want to start in that starting 5 for this Florida State offensive line, you know you have to be great, because there's a lot of good players on this offensive line. There's a lot of guys that have proven production at the college football level. And I think Jacob Rizzy really just adds to that list. I'm really excited now. He's a guy that is not going to enroll until the summer because he's got to finish up his degree at Harvard. But I'm going to be kind of plugged in on what is Jacob Rizzy, how is it sounding like he's competing in that summer camp? Because, again, I think he's going to add a lot of competition to this unit and has 2 years of eligibility. And that's a conversation that we've had a lot in terms of what Mike Norvell covets in the transfer portal. He wants guys that not only are coming in and immediately adding to this depth chart and to this roster, but guys that can be continued to be developed within this Florida State program too. Jacob Rizzy, he has a highlight film on YouTube as well, so I would go check that out if you are Florida State fans. The first thing, though, I'm excited about, this is a hyper athlete, a guy that is really, really athletic. I think can play a lot of different spots on the offensive line. Another good get for the Florida State Seminoles. Again, apologies for being a little late on this update. Had to get some filming, was not too familiar with Jacob Rizzy. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.